Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm Ben, and being a full-time musician, in other words, what I hope to do for the rest of my life, I look at it, being a musician as sort of just a spherical kind of thing. Like there's infinite aspects to it and infinite aspects you can choose to pursue, as opposed to simply, I'm going to play a bunch of live shows or I'm going to record an album. That being said, there are two particular facets that I focused on for my SLE, and which I hope to continue to focus on throughout my future. And those two aspects are booking and playing and producing shows, as well as making records with people. So we'll start off with making a show and how that happens. Typically, it begins with finding a venue, finding out if that venue works through a production company or vice versa. For the show that my classmate Evan and I are putting on this Friday, we chose a venue that does not work through a production company. So what that means is the show is entirely DIY, which means we had a lot of extra work to do. So that includes, obviously, budgeting. How are you going to pay people? How much are you going to pay them? How many people are you going to have? That sort of thing. So what we did was we went through a program called Brown Paper Tickets, which is sort of a program built for DIY shows. You enter all the information about the show, you decide how much you want to charge per ticket, and they make their money off of a roughly 10% service fee that they put on top of that ticket. Booking acts is obviously the other big one. That means having connections. Evan booked the comedy side of the show, which includes his own group as well as another large comedy group, the Cavalry. And then I booked myself as well as the group that I opened for at the Bluebird Theater, Dear Me. So booking acts is a relatively simple and self-explanatory process. You know, a couple emails, phone calls back and forth, and that's about as simple as that gets. After that is sort of the heavy lifting of the whole show production process, and that's promotion. Promotion is the hardest part because no matter how well you book a show or how great your graphic design is or how great the bands are, ultimately the show is quite literally nothing without the crowd, without the draw. And so that is why promotion is so crucial. So promotion can include anything from designing posters, putting them up, calling people, talking to people, really anything you can do to get people to come to that show. As an example, Evan and I, we talked to a friend of mine who lives in LA who's good with graphic design, and he designed us a poster based off of some ideas we had. And then we went, physically drove to several venues around town and put those posters up. We talked to people, we sent out emails, Facebook posts, all that sort of thing. It's difficult to sort of explain how critical that is without it sounding more just like, oh, please come to my show this Friday. It's a very serious aspect, and it is sort of marketing is what it is at its core. Other aspects to putting on a show include obviously sound systems, what that looks like, physically deciding where the acts are going to play during the space, set times, things like that. Once you've got all of that squared away, you're pretty much ready to put on a show. We're at that point now, and so this Friday at Barrels, we have a 4-act variety show going on. And that's really exciting. It's taken a lot of work, but we're ready to do that. The other aspect to my SLE was, of course, making records. I worked on 3 separate projects for my SLE. The first was a relatively acoustic album with Louisa Walker, and we did 9 tracks. I worked on my own album, of which I got 7 of the 10 tracks done, early recording stages, and then I finished up mixing and mastering with an 11-track album with a Remsel alumni, Kyle Wright. So making a record is a lot more complicated than simply hitting record and playing to a metronome. I acted as the producer for all three of these, obviously myself and the project with Kyle. Producing doesn't necessarily mean engineering or mixing or mastering. Producing at its core is really deciding where the record is going to go, making sonic decisions. Do we want ukulele here? Do we want a lead guitar here? Do we want acoustic guitar, electric guitar? Things like that. You're always trying to push the artist to explore creative areas that they may not have explored previously, or maybe as an artist, and I've done this plenty of times, you miss something. Maybe there's a chord that doesn't quite mesh with the bass line or something like that. And so as a producer, it's your job to sort of step in and say, hey, maybe try playing a C instead of an F here, and maybe that'll go with the bass line that you wrote. That's production. Next comes engineering. Engineering is the technical aspect of it all. So actual work with the gear. In my case, I worked with 3 different microphones and just a single interface. What that means is you plug right into this magical box, which goes into your computer, and then you can play instruments, and they will be recorded directly to your computer's hard drive. So engineering also involves some creative decisions. As an example, I made the decision early on with Louisa that we would track guitar both with a microphone and direct input. So what that means is we would have a 1/4-inch cable running from her acoustic guitar into my computer, but then we would also have a microphone about a foot away so that we would capture both of those signals, which sort of segues right into mixing. Mixing is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You're working a lot with levels and the panning of the tracks, assuming you're working in stereo. So with mixing, I had a fully direct input track, and I had a mic'd input track. I made the decision early on that for most of the tracks, I would pan the mic'd guitar all the way to the left, so it's only in your left headphone, and then I would pan the direct input all the way to the right, so it's only in your right headphone. What that does is it sort of creates a larger sound without actually having to record a guitar 2 times over. And it creates a different sound, obviously, because with a microphone, you pick up the physical sound of their fingertips hitting the body of the guitar, or the pick dragging along the strings, which direct input doesn't necessarily pick up. Direct input allows more dynamic range. You can sort of work with the tone knobs on your guitar. Typically, it's got a lot more bass to it. And so when you pan those left and right, you get a really full sound that really does sound like it's coming at you from all directions. Since it was such a stripped back album, I figured that would be a good decision because we could make it sound intimate, but also large. Mixing also involves depth and EQing to sort of just touch the surface of what that is. EQing is equalizing. What that means is everything has a frequency: high end, mid, low end. So as a mixer and a producer, my job is to get all the instruments to sit in a mix nicely. I tend to record lots and lots of instruments per track. Over the course of my SLE, there were 1,440 separate takes, which is about 52 takes every day. So I like to layer stuff a lot, which makes it even more important because the more guitars you have, the more basses you have, the more sonic overlap you have. And what starts to happen if you let that go unchecked is it just starts to sound muddy or overwhelming, or just, to put it plainly, bad. So EQing is where you cut some of the ranges, or in some cases boost them. So say you've got a bass guitar and you've got an electric guitar. Well, the electric guitar, of course, has some low end, unless you turn the tone knob all the way up, and certain electric guitar-y things. But typically speaking, a bass guitar and an electric guitar overlap. frequency-wise. So what is typical to do, and what I did with most of my tracks, is you cut all of the high end off the bass, and you cut most of the low end off of the guitar, so the bass dominates its natural range, which is, of course, low end, and the guitar dominates its natural range, which, with my kind of music, tends to be sort of a more high-end, sort of ambient, drony type sound. With Louisa, it was relatively sparse, so I didn't have to do too much cutting of the ranges, and that also gives it a more intimate and natural sound, because even if a mix is full and the guitars are mixed very well, it's still possible to sort of identify that the ranges have been cut on that guitar, especially if you isolate it. Whereas on the acoustic album, since there's not that much going on, it's easier to leave things how they are naturally and sort of work with that. So after mixing comes mastering, and it's the process that I am not all that comfortable with. Mastering is a very subjective aspect, which is why it's so difficult to talk about, but as best I can explain it, mastering is the act of making sure the record as a whole sounds good on any sound system. So that means making sure the fades in between tracks. So how many seconds of silence are there between songs? Is every song the same volume level? Are there weird clicks, hisses, anything like that? As when you're mastering, you no longer work with the individual recorded tracks. You work with the master track, and you just sort of typically. And so with that, you do some final EQing. You add some reverb to the whole mix to make it sound a little bit more spacious, more natural. You fine-tune the fades, which a lot of albums, both past and present, do this really cool thing where one song fades directly into another. So that kind of thing is mastering. It's the most difficult, and like I said, it's very subjective. It's not a process that a computer could necessarily do for you. But it is the final step in the creation of the album. After all of that is released, which nowadays is really easy as a musician, we have options like, obviously, places like YouTube where you can just put up a video, really simple. You have places like Bandcamp, which allow you to name the price of the album that you would like, upload all the tracks in extremely high quality, and they take a very minor cut. So programs like that allow musicians to negate having to go through a label, which makes it incredibly easy for someone to just go into GarageBand, throw a couple tracks together, and put it on the internet and charge for it. People may not buy it, but you can do it. And it's really easy now, which I'm grateful for, Lisa's grateful for, and Kyle's grateful for. And so for release, Luisa is releasing her album through Bandcamp on May 14th. Kyle and I are releasing our album this Saturday through Bandcamp, as well as all other outlets, through a wonderful service called CD Baby, which is sort of like an umbrella service where you pay a set fee and they will take your album, give you a barcode, and publish your album through most avenues. So iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, that sort of thing. And then my album is nowhere close to being done, so that'll be a little while longer. But that's what I did for my SLE, and that's what I hope to continue doing. Thanks, guys.